check the sun.
The mic is going to check now.
Because what?
This mic is on, so he's going to check everything.
Everything else? This is recording and all that?
We haven't started recording. We're just waiting to.
You tested it? It was good?
Yeah.
Inshallah.
And
It's got a
the
USB
mic.
stick. And
I believe this is for you.
oh, okay. From where? Okay. Somewhere. And I gotta log into Canvas on my other computer, right?
To see the chat.
Yeah.
But it's
And you sent the announcement already?
I sent it. It should be people should get a message, or you can just go to conferences and join it.
Okay.
But I sent all the students a message.
I did, yeah, we changed it. Yeah, we changed it. No, it was. Sorry about that. No, it's not a book by Bilal Phillips. It's an audio CD set. I forgot to write it. He doesn't have a book on it. Huh. Maybe it was just a paper, but his details is a CD set. Yeah, it's never been put in writing. It's great though, but we're not gonna get to it. Oh, that's great. That's great. I look forward to that. Alaikum assalam. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, it was a khutbah. Khutbah. Debate is in May, inshallah. Inshallah. Yeah, inshallah ta'ala. Inshallah. I will get you the information, inshallah.
Should I start recording the webcam just in case?
Yeah, go ahead.
Still not working?
You saw the announcement? Which announcement? Oh, that one. No. Oh, yeah.
It's working in the center.
Yeah, it's on.
Call Sammer.
Still here?
Call him. He might still be here, or he's leaving. Salam. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Alhamdulillah.
Ahmed.
Ahmed from San Bernardino?
No. I come usually attend La Mirada. La
Okay.
Mirada Mosque.
Right.
There's good programs here, and then started attending here.
Excellent. Welcome.
I actually added you on Facebook.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, you accepted it today.
Okay.
I had a question. I haven't registered. Could I attend the class?
You can try it out, yeah, inshallah, for the first day, and then if you like it, register at the end. Inshallah.
I'll attend.
Okay, now it is. It's not perfect. Is it okay if I start the webcam?
Yeah,
Just in-
bismillah.
Okay.
What was it?
I have no idea.
We're doing both, the camera has a problem, so because the quality is bad and the blacking out problem, so we're doing a backup recording. We have both, inshallah.
Page 4 to 7, but aren't you going from page 1?
Where did it say page 4 to 7?
4 to 7
In the syllabus?
syllabus, yeah?
Let me see, inshallah. Syllabus.
I didn't know whether it was different or
There was a mistake in the beginning. I'll look at it right now. Intention for wudu, pages 3 to 4. So it's the page of the. Yeah. Intention for wudu. It's not 3 to 4. It's not 3 to 4 in the book. It should be. There's no number on the pages. It's let's take a look. So right here, page 3 up here. Page 3, right? And then 4. So we're gonna start from 1 actually. So that's a mistake. We'll start from 1, inshallah. Yeah, inshallah. All right. Which one? Bilal Phillips. Okay, inshallah. All right, let's get started, inshallah. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, inshallah. All right, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So we had a few technical issues, so alhamdulillah. I'm starting a few minutes late, but we will try to make it up by speeding up, inshallah. I'm sure everyone will appreciate that. So before we begin, a few preliminary things. Where are my preliminary things? Class notes. Okay. So this class has been renamed from Islamic Law 4 to Islamic Law 201. So the difference means it's more of like an upper division class. So for those of you who are going to be doing the, who just started and they're working on their certificate, you don't necessarily need this class unless you're specializing in Islamic law and specializing in fiqh. Those of you who are just about to graduate in June, though, for your AA, you still need to do it. So that's, alhamdulillah, that's life. So it's actually going to be 201. Only people who are going to specialize in Islamic law need this, and I think you'll get to understand why, inshallah. So the syllabus is online on our website. Has anyone not been a CIS student in the past? Is this the first CIS class for somebody? Okay. For you too, there's a few things that probably during break time. Are you going to be here during break time? You should talk to Sister Amina during break time, and she'll kind of get you caught up. She's the TA of the class and the administrator of the college, so she will get you caught up in terms of what needs to get done and all of that. Okay. So this is a level 4 class, which means that it's recommended. Oh, yeah. Which means that it's recommended to take the previous law classes, but it's not a requirement. So what that means is if you take this without having taken all of the law 1, law 2, law 3, you will still be able to digest about 90% of what's going on in class. The 10% you might need to read up a little bit here and there, but I would recommend that you try to stick it out and you just try to do some extra research to catch up on the other things. But I'll try to explain things as we go, clearly, but not repeating old information. So the module is called the Practical Application of the Principles in Islamic Law. So as you can see, it's been renamed from contemporary issues to this, even though it's still going to address contemporary issues. So what we're going to be doing is you can read the rest of this on your own. The primary resource for this class will be a book called The Distinguished Jurist Primer, which is Bidayatul Mujtahid wa Nihayatul Muqtasid by the scholar Ibn Rushd. And I'll start by talking a little bit about who he is and about his life. when we get started with the book. The assessment is going to be as follows. There are weekly outlines, which are worth 70% of your grade, and they will be done after the class is actually taught. So today's class, you're going to make an outline for what we covered in today's class. So you're not actually making an outline on the things that you have not covered in class yet, because it is a very difficult book, or I wouldn't say very difficult. It is a challenging book, and the teacher's explanation is actually important for you to process your outline. So what you're going to do is basically this. So let me give you an example. I'll give you an example later. Okay, 70% is going to be the outlines, and the final exam will be 30%. So the way it's going to work is every week we're going to cover about 5 or maybe 4 to 6 issues, depending on how many we can cover from the book. And there's about 56 issues that are in our syllabus. There's selections from this book called the Distinguished Jurist Primer. So we're going to try to cover 4 to 6, maybe 7 or something like that per week. Some are longer, some are shorter. And then what you do is, after we've covered that section in class, you're going to actually go back through the book and you're going to outline and kind of reorganize what we had actually covered in that section of the book. So that's going to be your weekly outlines every week. Final exam is going to be a selection from the book which we have not studied. And by the end, you'll be expected to make the same type of outline on sections which we had not covered in class. And that's going to be your final exam, so that you'll learn how the author writes, you learn how to understand what he's saying, and then by the end of the class, you'll be on your own to figure out what he's actually saying without me having to tell you. So that's the purpose behind it. So that'll be your final exam. Classes will be Tuesday, 7:30 to 10 p.m. These are the outline dates. So see, week 1 outline, which is today's class, is week 1. It's going to be due on the 7th, which is next week. So just keep that in mind. It's going to be due the following week. These are the sections that we're going to be reading. So what has happened is we've given you a PDF, which is on Canvas. And Canvas is the system that we provide all of our course content to the students. And you need to download this file, which looks like this when you open it. And it has all the sections that we're going to be covering, with one exception. It says starting from page 3 to 4. We're actually starting on page 1. So that's one little modification that needs to be made here. But in addition to that, everything is fine. All right, so these are the issues that we're going to cover. So you can go through it and you can look at, a woman being an imam. Can you pray behind a fasiq imam, meaning an imam who's a sinner? Do you have to pray the 2 units when entering a mosque? Do you have to pay zakah on jewelry? Sighting of the moon, for example. All these interesting things. Do you say Bismillah when you slaughter an animal or not? Triple divorce, does it count as 3 when it's pronounced as 3 divorces, or it counts as 1? Conditions of a murder, sale with the delay, conditions of a woman petitioning for divorce, etc. So as you can see, these are contemporary issues in the sense that they're very popular issues in the Muslim community, and we're going to be going through them in our class, inshallah ta'ala. Okay? So that's the syllabus. Let me close that for now. Yeah. Last time it was 0 or 10? No, it'll be the same. The same, inshallah. There is. On this one, it's pretty clear. Either you get it or you don't get it. So this one's going to be more clear, inshallah. So I'll show you what it looks like. So that's that. Few things about class. Remember, coming on time is very important. Punctuality is important. We try to always start on time, and we've had a very good reputation of starting on time, with few technical issues sometimes here and there. So please come on time. Please make sure to see the new signs that we put up in the back of the class. There's a sign right there. It says, "Quiet, please, class in session." So just keep that in mind. The side whispering and all that. I'll remind everyone else that, remember, when you start, if you don't understand something and you start asking your neighbor, What happens is now you're not paying attention to what I'm saying next, and now you're behind even more, and you've distracted your neighbor from being able to pay attention. So the best thing to do is raise your hand and ask the question. So what I would like to have, though, is we have a kind of a new policy this quarter, and that is only students who are actually enrolled in the class should be asking questions. So, or anyone who's pretty much gonna enroll for sure, they should be asking the questions, because sometimes visitors come in and do that, and what's gonna happen is gonna kind of throw the class off. So please make sure that you're enrolled if you're gonna be asking a question. And also those students who are online, they can ask questions directly online, and I'm monitoring this and making sure, just checking if they ask anything, so they can be part of this class. So I want to see a lot of interaction in this class, and I want to see you asking questions, because you're going to need to ask questions sometimes. Okay, so everything else is standard CIS policy. Any questions before we begin about any of these things? Yes. Yes, go. Yes.
So we have a sample of the outline of first week.
Mm-hmm.
So we should be redoing it, and that would be the one due.
Yeah, I mean, technically you should retype it and submit it. You're probably going to look at mine anyways, but if you use it for help, that's fine. But yeah, I'll show you exactly what it's going to look like, inshallah. Same format. Yeah, exactly. So I gave you the format of exactly what it's supposed to look like.
And same topics, same sessions what is in the outline as an example.
Every issue is going to be different. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the same style and format, and you're going to fill it in with the different issue that it covered in the book.
Yeah, but it will be the same pages or same thing as
In the syllabus.
in the syllabus.
Yes, in the syllabus. Yeah, exactly. All right. Any other questions? Yeah.
So does that mean if we do 4 to 6 topics a week, we're going to have 4 to 6 outlines?
Exactly. And outline is like half a page to a page maximum. You're gonna see it's not that long, so like maybe 5 pages or something like that. No. So so let me show you. So for example, this one right here, this, according to your PDF file, this is page 8. According to the book, it's page 3. So we're talking about the book pages, because once you get here, you're actually on page 162. Right? So according to your PDF file, you're on page 43. So we're talking about this one right here, 162, according to the printed book. Okay, the printing of the book. Okay. And let me just, for some reason, my notes are refusing to pull up. There we go. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. What are the objectives of this class? I want you to understand before we begin that the goals that I want you to get from this class are, number one, I want you to understand the underlying causes of why scholars have differed over these issues. That's the number one objective in this class, to understand the underlying reason. Not just that they differed, because we hear that all the time. Well, there's 2 opinions on this issue. Some scholars said this and some scholars said that, and then the people get confused and they think, why do all these scholars say different things? So when you took principles of Islamic law, in Islamic law 3, you kind of got the point, you kind of got an understanding, but here we want to specify an issue with the underlying cause or causes about why scholars differed. So that's number one. Number two, the goal is for you to appreciate the differences of opinion that exist in Islamic law. Once you understand how complex of a process the scholars actually use to get to these differences, you begin to appreciate the differences and say, I don't agree with the position, but I can respect how you arrived at the position. And that's one of the things one of the goals of this class is as well. The third is to learn to not be so dogmatic in your own opinions, okay? And dogmatic means you're too assertive and too, it's not about confidence, but it's about thinking that only your opinion is right and everyone else is just wrong out there in the world, and it's just, you're right 100%. That's usually because you never took a class like this, right? So you're not exposed to the other knowledge. And that's one of the things that this class is designed to do, is designed to humble you and make you understand and expose you to something that you've not been exposed to. So people who've never heard of any other opinion, they just read one hadith, for example, and they think this must be the way I understand it, absolutely has to be the only way it could potentially be understood. There's no other way it could be. And then when you actually not only hear that other scholars said something, but you understand why they said something different, then you start to humble yourself. You begin to appreciate how much depth of reasoning is involved in the process, and hopefully you start to realize how wrong you were in certain things. So depending on where you are in your progression of knowledge, if you've been taking a lot of classes, you probably already started to go through this, and you realize, you know what, I thought this, and then I learned how ignorant I was previously. And that's how knowledge is. It's designed to humble you and designed to, so what happens naturally is that there's going to be this process, depending on how long it is, where you start to correct some of the things which you were very, very confident about. And you start kind of going, you become more humble. At the same time, you stop being so overly confident about everything, and you're a little bit more cautious and careful when you're conveying something. So you kind of tone down and everything. Now the goal is not to become someone who's not confident in anything. That's not the goal, but that's a step and a stage and a process which you probably will go through if you start studying things for a very long time. It's a process. It could last 6 months. It could last 10 years. It could last 20 years. And then the goal is for you to build yourself back up to a point of, yes, I'm confident in my own opinions now, but at the same time, I'm willing to respect these opinions, and I'm willing to not respect these opinions because they're like way out there. So you start to differentiate, and you start to understand there's this circle of things which are classified as Islamic inside the circle. It's not just there's one Islamic thing. There's one opinion, there's one understanding. But there's things within this circle of things which are acceptable in the side of understanding Islamic law, what is Islam, all of that. And then there are things that are outside. And you're somewhere in that circle, that's where you want to be, and you're confident in there. So what's going to happen is, in the beginning, potentially, you may start to become a little bit relativistic in the way you view things. Because you're like, I can't decide because this argument was so strong, and then Ibn Rushd presents the opposite argument, and that was so strong, and then he presents the opposite argument, that was so strong, now I'm confused. So that's what happens to a lot of people, and it's a normal process, a natural process. The goal is not to become, oh, nothing's right, I don't know what to do, everything is correct. No, that's not the goal. But the goal is that eventually by the end of class, you build yourself back up and you say, now I understand why other people do different things, and I kind of incline towards this approach a little bit, but I'm not going to take such a decisive stance at this point in my life. So that's kind of what you want to get to by the end of this class. And the last thing is we're going to learn in this class, or what we're supposed to achieve in this class, is to learn how to tackle contemporary issues or new issues that arise. Every single day we have new issues that are coming up. So for example, who heard about the $70,000 hamburger? Nobody obviously goes to the Q&A section of the IIOC website, because I actually answered this question. So basically what happened was they're producing meat which is engineered in a laboratory from tissues of organs and through cloning. So what they did was they kept on, reproducing the cells. It was like meat that was actually grown in a dish, in a test tube or petri dish or whatever, and they put fiber after fiber, and they actually concocted an entire burger out of it, and of artificially made meat in a laboratory. So that process to make one burger, it took like $70,000 of all the researchers and everything to produce it. So they call it the $70,000 burger, right? It blows away that $6 burger or whatever the thing is, right? So this is going to be hitting our shelves in a decade or 2 or 3. Oh yes, it's going to be in the supermarkets. Once the procedure becomes cheaper, they're going to start producing meat. So there needs to be, you need to not only say, oh, this is halal, is haram. You need to figure out, how do we even tackle such an issue? How do we even start to tackle such an issue? There's another issue, which your father, alerted to me, that it's becoming this new trend now in certain countries where they sell you like an animal, which is like, it's been cloned, and it's kind of like comes in like a frozen state or something like that. You buy it off the shelf basically, and you come home and it turns into like a real animal. It's really weird. So people are going to start buying this, these bio, I think they call bio pets or something like that, whatever they're going to be called. And what do you do with that? Like something that's just been cloned, and how do you even start to address that issue? Where do you look in the Islamic text? You're not going to find a hadith on bio animals, or bio pets so how do you deal with that? Once you learn how scholars have dealt with the other issues in the past, now you learn the techniques and the methods by which you can actually start building on them. Not that you're going to come up with these fatwa, but what you will also learn is you'll learn how to see good reasoning from bad reasoning. So you find scholar so-and-so, or maybe non-scholar so-and-so on TV, who happens to be one of those, what do they call them? The TV preachers? Televangelists, thank you. So it happened to be one of the Muslim televangelists, for example, and they're giving, fatwas, Islamic verdicts left and right. How do you figure out whether their explanation or their logic is strong or not? You're gonna figure out from this class to kind of understand, does this person really seem to know what they're talking about, or they look extremely primitive compared to the intellectual discussions that the classical scholars, were having and all of that. So that's another thing. So there's a lot of new issues that are coming up in all different fields, and we need to learn how to tackle them, or at least assess how, what process we use to tackle them, how correct it is or not. So these are some of the goals of the class, all right? So this is the book right here, the Distinguished Jurist's Primer, okay? Volume 1, Bidayatul Mujtahid wa Nihayatul Muqtasid. So the title of the book is Bidayatul Mujtahid. Bidaya means the beginning, or the beginning stage of al-Mujtahid. Al-Mujtahid is somebody who is a specialist of the highest caliber in Islamic law. So a scholar of the highest caliber in Islamic law is considered a mujtahid, somebody who's actually formed like their own school of thought and does not have to follow any other person. They can independently look at the texts. So Ibn Rushd named this book the beginning of the mujtahid, meaning this is the first step for someone who would like to reach the status of becoming a mujtahid, perhaps someday. وَنِهَايَةُ الْمُقْتَصِدِ, and it's the end phase of al-muqtasid. So my teacher explained this to us. Al-muqtasid is basically the one who says, I've just had enough. I don't want to go anymore. I'm just tired. I'm tired of hearing all these opinions. I'm tired of going into all these detail. I don't need any more than this. This is all I need. It's sufficient for me. So he said it can be the beginning of a person who wants to become the mujtahid, or it can be the last book that you need. If you're one of those people who doesn't want to become mujtahid, and you're just like, this is all I need in Islamic law, I don't need to deal with any of this anymore. It's a reference book. One day I can just resort to it, and I'm done. So this is the title of the book. This is Ibn Rushd. So let me tell you a little bit about this author. Ibn Rushd died in 1198, which is, we mention the death date always just to kind of see in which era, he was living and when his influence, assuming that the influence of a person is the strongest near the end of his life, because his ideas begin to develop and, he kind of comes to certain conclusions. So he is known as Ibn Rushd al-Hafid. Hafid means the grandson. So the reason why, because there's another scholar named, very famously known as Ibn Rushd al-Jadd, which is the grandfather. So he's the grandson, and his grandfather was a very, very famous Muslim scholar as well. In the West, he's known as Averroes. Averroes. So this is the famous philosopher, Averroes. It's the same person who is really celebrated in Western society. So let me tell you a little bit about him, so in his background. So he was a Berber, and he was basically an Andalusian polymath, right? So he was living in Andalusia, in Spain, and a polymath is basically someone who's an expert in like too many fields. He's a specialist in just so many fields, and he writes in so many different fields. So he has books on philosophy, on mathematics, on geography, theology, psychology, music theory, geography, medicine, astronomy, physics, you name it, he's got books in all these fields. He was a specialist in medicine. He was a doctor to one of the sultans and the leaders in Spain, the Khalifa actually in Spain. He has several books on all of these fields, so comprising everything. I skipped Islamic law. Obviously, this book is on Islamic law. He's very, very famous for that. So he lived in Cordoba, which is in Andalusia in Spain, the city of Cordoba, and he died in Marrakesh, which is in Morocco today. He followed the Maliki school of thought in Islamic law, and I'm going to explain what that is in a few moments. Just like his grandfather. So what you're going to find is that this book is actually written with an emphasis on the Maliki school of law. Although he doesn't confine himself to Maliki school always, but it's kind of, he has that influence there. And according to many scholars, he is, quote unquote, the founding father of secular thought in Western Europe. Now that's interesting. You would not expect a Muslim scholar who's considered a pious person, who's writing books like this, to be the founding father of secular thought in Western Europe. But he is. He is. And to give you an example of how much Western society has acclaimed Ibn Rushd or Averroes, he has a statue in Cordoba of him still standing there. And if you go to Spain, you'll notice that the Spanish people don't necessarily like Muslims or Islam. They're not very sympathetic towards it because of the history and all of that. Yet they still have this giant statue of Ibn Rushd standing up there, and they've kept that and they've preserved that. In the Divine Comedy of Dante, he actually praises Ibn Rushd, whereas he puts most of the other Muslims in hellfire and all of that. He actually puts Ibn Rushd kind of like in a medium state, neither in hell nor in heaven. That's like a big thing for Dante. This is like is the best you can get out of him probably. So this is pretty good. So that shows you how much they respect him. There's a novel, Ulysses. Anyone have heard of the novel Ulysses? He's mentioned in there as well. There's an asteroid named after Ibn Rushd. Asteroid 8318 was actually named Asteroid Averroes. Right, so to show respect to him and his works on astronomy, they actually named the asteroid after him. There's a plant genus actually named after him as well, Averroa. Is a certain type of plant. So they respected him so much in the field of botany he was also writing, they decided to name a plant species after him. Also, on the moon, one of the craters on the moon is actually named after him as well. So it just shows you how much respect Western society has for a guy like Ibn Rushd Averroes. And the reason why they have so much respect is because one of the things he was specialist in is commenting or writing books of tafsir, basically writing commentaries on the books of Aristotle and Plato as well. So basically all the thought of Aristotle reached Western civilization or reached the Europeans through Ibn Rushd, because many of his works, you couldn't really understand them, they were so convoluted. So what he did was he wrote a bunch of explanations. So he actually wrote 3 commentaries on the same book of Aristotle, and in addition to all the other commentaries that he had. So he made a small one, and then he made a medium one, then he made one commentary where he analyzes every single sentence that Aristotle wrote and gives an entire explanation. So the people said without his work, we wouldn't even be able to understand what this guy was saying, right, in the first place. So because of that, then the whole Renaissance, so he's considered to be one of the fathers of the Renaissance, or one of the inspiring factors behind the Western Renaissance and the Enlightenment later on, all of that. So that's Ibn Rushd. So it kind of seems like he wouldn't be one of those people, but he is. And he was a pious Muslim. He was a practicing Muslim. yet his philosophical ideas were not they were not secular, obviously, because he's a religious Muslim, but he had things which were more in line with Aristotelian thought. Whereas what was happening is that in his day and age in Spain, the primary, or the most popular school was like a Neoplatonic form of thinking in terms of mysticism type of thing. So he basically helped, turn the tide on that system. Yeah, Omar.
So why
Averroes? So what they did, they Latinized all the names. So Ibn Sina became Avicenna, and Al-Ghazali became, Al-Ghazal or something like that. So they Latinized all of their names. So whether they had an underlying agenda behind that or not, it wouldn't surprise me, and it's not that big of a deal. So Averroes, Ibn Rushd. Okay, so let's get started on the book. This was translated by Professor Imran Ahsan Khan Niazi, who is a professor in Pakistan. He did a pretty decent job, but a few things I'm going to be adjusting along the way. It's been reviewed by Professor so-and-so. All right, so this is the introduction. So Ibn Rushd begins, "Praise be to Allah, with all due praise, and prayers and blessings on his Prophet Muhammad, his family, and his companions." So it shows you this is a practicing Muslim. This is not a secular guy who's not going to be starting, without praising Allah and praising the Prophet, peace be upon him. So he mentions, "My purpose in this treatise is to lay down in it for myself, by way of remembrance, the issues, which are known as masail, of the rulings or the ahkam that are agreed upon and those that are disputed, along with their evidences, and to indicate those bases of the disputes that resemble general rules and principles for the faqih, the jurist, the specialist in Islamic law, may be presented with problems on which Islamic law is silent." Okay, so one more objective of this class, by the way, is to actually learn to dissect and understand a classical text without a teacher present. Right? So some of these sentences are going to be difficult to understand until you get in the hang of it. Right? So what he's saying is, he wrote this book for himself, primarily, to remember all the stuff that he had learned, right? And all the issues and the rulings that Islamic scholars have been talking about, the ones that are agreed upon, as well as the ones that are disputed. So he wanted to these are his notes basically. These are his personal notes that he decided to kind of compile together. And then he says, "And I also did this for the jurist." So the person who's going to become a specialist in Islamic law, they might be presented with problems on which Islamic law is silent, like the bio pet, or the new bio burger, or whatever it is. How do you address those issues? This is exactly what he's saying. I want you to learn this so that you can understand the principles, and then you can actually begin to address and tackle these new issues. So he said he knew that new issues are going to keep coming up. It's not just going to stop all of a sudden. So you need to be able to build upon something, and that's why he wrote this book. The issues are mostly those that are expressly stated in the texts. So meaning the issues that he's going to cover in this book are mainly those which are expressly stated in the Islamic texts of the Quran and in the Hadith, or are closely related to those that are so stated. They are the issues agreed upon by the Muslim fuqaha, or the jurists, from the generation of the companions until such time that taqleed became rampant. So taqleed is basically this concept of blindly following qualified scholarship, which means that you follow either a school of thought or you follow a scholar without demanding that he has to explain to you every single evidence that he came up with. So when you ask someone, when I pray, do I make 2 sajdas, 2 prostrations, or 1 in each unit of prayer? And he'll say, well, you're supposed to make 2. Well, you have to show me all the proof. I want to see every single hadith and verse of the Quran that you used in order to derive that I'm supposed to make 2 prostrations. Now, how many hadiths are there that are actually there that talk about 2 prostrations? Hundreds of them. So, and the person says, and I want to see the grading of every single narrator in the chain of hadith on every single one of these things. Otherwise, I'm not going to trust what you're saying. That would be someone who is not willing to engage in any type of taqleed or blind following of a qualified authority, and they demand every single proof across the board. So what happened is that he's saying that the issues I'm going to be addressing are the issues that have been agreed upon by Muslim jurists from the time of the companions of the Prophet until the time that taqleed became rampant, meaning among the scholars even. So even scholars decide, you know what, we don't have time to sit there and investigate every single thing again from scratch. We have other things to do. We have books of mathematics to write. We have asteroids that need to be named after us and other things like that. So we don't have this much time. So what we need to do is let's just follow what great scholars of the past have done and build our own thing, but without having to go and reinvent the entire wheel from scratch. So this is what he's talking about. It became rampant. So this is what we're going to be talking about. So he's not necessarily mentioning it in such a bad way or in a good way either. So you'll see what his views are on this. Before recording these issues, we will mention to you as briefly as possible the different channels through which the rulings of Islamic law were received, the various categories of such rulings, and the causes that necessitated differences of opinion. So he's saying, before I even start my book and start getting into the issues, I want to give you a little bit overview of these principles, what we called before the principles of Islamic law, what's known as usul al-fiqh. So he's going to give you a little bit overview about why did scholars differ in the first place before I actually get to the real differences of what they differed over. So this is going to kind of be a very quick review of Islamic Law 3, if you remember anything from that class. Okay? Inshallah. So, and I've cut out a lot of parts of the introduction because it'd be very difficult for you, so it's going to make it easier. So he says, we say, this is his way of saying, I'm starting now. The channels through which the rulings were received from the Prophet are 3 in classification. So we learn rules in Islam from the Prophet by 3 ways. By word, meaning the things that he said. By deed, meaning the things that he did. And by implied approval, what's called taqrir in Arabic. Meaning sometimes he didn't say anything, he didn't really do anything, but someone did something in front of him and he didn't stop them. So what would that mean? If a prophet is sitting there and someone does something and he just sits there and he just continues his conversation, what does it generally mean? An implied consent, right? Because if someone did something wrong, it's the Prophet's responsibility, like any Muslim's responsibility, just to do something and tell them, hey, you're not supposed to be doing that or something like that. So the implied approval. With respect to the rulings about which the lawgiver is silent. So the word the lawgiver is commonly used by Muslim scholars to mean who is the lawgiver. It's actually Allah, right? But also it can mean Allah and His Messenger, both. So the one who's giving the law, who's formulating the law, meaning who's teaching you what to do in life, is Allah and His Messenger. It comes from both of them. So the lawgiver is silent. So with respect to the rulings about which the lawgiver is silent, meaning there's nothing in the Quran or in the Sunnah, the way of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that teaches you about something, what do? The majority of scholars say that the method of attaining them is through the use of analogy, qiyas. So if you don't have any text, you don't have a verse of the Quran, and you don't have a hadith on some specific issue, the majority of scholars say the best method, the most common method of figuring it out is by using analogy on something which is in the text. Right? And we had covered this before. So if you remember, an example would be, for example, the Quran doesn't, neither the Quran nor the hadith prohibits the smoking of marijuana. So you're going to go smoke out now? No. Because by analogy, if alcohol is prohibited because it intoxicates you and impairs your intellect, this by analogy, all other types of intoxicants and intoxicating drugs, which do something similar, are prohibited by analogy as well. So this is what he's talking about. Then he says the Zahiri school, which is known as the literalist school, maintains that analogy in Islamic law is void. So there should be no analogy in Islamic law, and that about which the lawgiver is silent has no ruling. Meaning anything that is not specifically mentioned in the Quran or in the Hadith, then there is no ruling. You cannot say it's permitted, you cannot say it's forbidden, you cannot say it's allowed. He's not saying everything's allowed, but he's just saying there is no ruling. So then Ibn Rushd responds, and let me tell you a little bit about the Zahiri school. So, the Zahiri school was formed by a man by the name of Dawood al-Zahiri. His name was Dawood. He died in 883 or 884 CE, so several centuries before Ibn Rushd. He was educated in Baghdad. He was a student of Abu Thawr, Yahya ibn Ma'in, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, etc. His father belonged to the Hanafi school of thought. So what happened was he kind of rebelled against his father, and he decided that the Hanafi school of thought is too rationalistic for me. So what he ended up doing is he went and joined the Shafi'i school of thought, which is a little bit more literal in nature. And after he joined that school, he started to become more and more having a literal bent in his thinking. So he ended up making his own school of thought, which is known as the Zahiri. Zahiri means exterior or outward. So you look at the outward form of a text, which is considered to be like the literal, leaning more towards the literal or the external facet of the text, and you interpret things that way. So he would say you only take the literal meaning of the text and you apply it. You can only apply it to the circumstances that have been described specifically in the text. Right? So this is kind of his thinking, and we're gonna be covering this a lot. So they rejected analogy. Let me give you an example. So he says, if a Muslim was fasting, let's say it's the month of Ramadan, and a Muslim goes on a journey and he's traveling. So we know that in Islamic law, if you're traveling on a journey, you don't have to fast, right? And if you do fast, if you want to, you can, right? So what does Dawood al-Zahiri say? If a Muslim goes on a journey in the month of Ramadan and they fast, they still need to make it up after Ramadan. It implies that you're not supposed to be doing it because Allah said, this is what you do. If you're in this state, you do this, you make it up. So even if you chose to do it, you still have to make it up anyways. So it doesn't matter if you did it once or something, you got to fast again anyways, no matter what. So that's one example. Another example is, to give you an example of real literalism. He said, when you're traveling, you're allowed to shorten your prayers. So scholars debated what is traveling? Like how long does a journey have to be, right? Is it 50 miles or is it 3 days you have to be traveling? What is the journey? So Dawood, taking a very literal position, said the Prophet said when you're traveling. So traveling, according to the linguistic meaning, can be any type of travel. So if you walk down the street to your friend's house, you can shorten your prayers because technically you traveled to his house. So this is his understanding, right? And then there are some incidents about even being even more literalistic than this. I don't know how true they are, but there's a hadith where the Prophet, peace be upon him, he said, anyone who urinates into a body of standing water should not take a bath from that water, right? Which obviously, right? If you're going to urinate into, that's kind of gross if you do that. So the Zahiri school, it's attributed to them, that they said, you know what? But if you take a cup and you urinate into the cup and then you pour the cup into the water, you can go ahead and bathe from that because technically you didn't urinate directly into the water. So you understand that, sometimes you can get very, very literal. Now the thing is, these are not, some of these things may sound crazy, but sometimes you will actually find that the Zahiri school sometimes helps to balance out or kind of redirect when someone has become overly non-literal or overly metaphorical. It kind of brings them back in the right direction on some issues. Now, obviously not on these issues, but on some other issues. So that's why we're going to be finding Ibn Rushd, in his time when he was writing in Spain, there was a very famous scholar by the name of Ibn Hazm, which I'm going to talk about, who was a pioneering figure of the Zahiri school or the literal school. And you're going to find that Ibn Rushd is always referring to him and bringing his arguments and kind of comparing and contrasting and all of that, because he was very popular in Spain at the time. So it's important to understand that background. Okay, so that's what the Zahiri school pretty much is. And interestingly, Dawood actually became very influential throughout the Muslim world, something that many people don't know. In the past, we're talking about 2-3 centuries before Ibn Rushd, before Ibn Hazm, he became very popular actually. But later on, after maybe a century later, he became sidelined by the other scholars and said, we can't do this. So that's what the Zahiri school has. So he says, so this is what Ibn Rushd introduces. The Zahiri school says analogy is void. You can't even use analogy. You have to take the text literally. So Ibn Rushd says the intellect, meaning the average human being's intellect, it witnesses to its validity. Meaning to the fact that analogy is correct. You're supposed to use analogy, right? So he's saying it's you use your mind and you figure out, anyone who has a brain is basically what he's saying, figure out that analogy is fine. This is the way we should be following things. Since the incidents, so he's going to give you a proof. The incidents among people are unlimited. Imagine the situations you're going to encounter in life are unlimited. There's no way you could ever confine them. Say, this is what happens. I walked to the city and this happened and that. You can never describe every single incident that's ever going to happen. And he says, while words, deeds, and implicit approvals are limited. So meaning the statements of the Prophet, right, that in his words, his deeds, and his approvals, they're limited. Therefore, it's impossible to compare the finite and the infinite. So this is Ibn Rushd's explanation of why analogy is valid and it must be used and it should be used. Okay? See, any questions so far? Any online questions? No? All right. Questions? Okay. So then he starts. The types of words through which the rulings are received by means of transmitted evidences are 4 in number. So all the rulings, transmitted evidences are the Quran and the Hadiths of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So there's 4 types of words that you find in the Quran and in the Hadith. 3 of them are agreed upon, and the 4th one is disputed. The 3 of them that are agreed upon, he actually mentions 4. This is the translator messed this one up. He said, لَفْظٌ عَامٌ يُحْمَلُ عَلَى عُمُومِهِ, which means general wording intended to be general. And we'll come back to what this means. لَفْظٌ خَاصٌ يُحْمَلُ عَلَى خُصُوصِهِ, specific wording intended to be specific. لَفْظٌ عَامٌ يُرَادُ بِهِ الْخُصُوص, general wording intended to be specific. Or لَفْظٌ خَاصٌ يُرَادُ بِهِ الْعُمُوم, specific wording intended to be general. So let's take a look at his examples. The example of the first one is found in the words of the Exalted, in the words of Allah. Forbidden unto you, meaning for food, are carrion, dead. Who knows what carrion is? I just gave it to you. Yeah, dead animals, right? Carrion and blood and swine flesh. So this is in the Quran, chapter 5, verse 3. So he's looking at this and saying, an example of general wording that was intended to be general is in this verse. Forbidden to you is carrion, blood, and swine flesh. So he says Muslim jurists agreed that the word swine, khinzir, includes all types of swine. So it doesn't matter what type of swine. When the word swine was used, khinzir, the wording itself is general, right? So when you say pig or swine, it's a general word, right? You're not specifying a certain type of pig. So it's general. He said the intended meaning was also general, that all types of swine or pig are prohibited. And then, of course, he's a Muslim scholar, so he's going to throw in some little things here. Unless, of course, it belongs to the category to which the name is not applied, except by way of ishtirak, meaning similar vocal phrase, meaning one word that has a different meaning. So for example, in Arabic, there's a term called the sea swine. It's known as khinzirul bahr. So the pig of the sea is actually a porpoise. So you know what a porpoise is, like those little seal-looking things, right? That porpoise is called in Arabic khinzirul bahr, the pig of the sea. So are you not allowed to eat it because in the Quran it says you're not allowed to eat khinzir? So people ask this question, they say, but why can't we, are we allowed to eat this or not? You're allowed to eat it because it just so happens that the two words are related, but khinzir is not referring to that at all. And of course, in Arabic, kalbul bahr, the dog of the sea, is actually a seal. So it's called the dog of the sea, right? So if the ruling on eating dogs does not necessarily apply to seals, could or could not, but not because of the texts, okay? So that's what he's saying. So that's an example of general wording that's intended to be general. Now that's obvious, right?
I'm going back to the four categories. Isn't there another category that some jurists use called maslaha?
We're only talking about wording here. So maslaha is a separate thing, but this is only wording. Yeah. So in terms of wording, you have general intended to be general, which is the normal case, right? Second one is example of general wording intended to be specific, all right? Which is found in the words of Allah, take alms, meaning take charity from their wealth, so you may purify them and may make them grow. So this is a verse about zakah. How you're supposed to, zakah should be collected from your wealth and distributed back in charity. So Ibn Rushd says, based on this, the Muslim jurist agreed that zakah is not obligatory on all kinds of wealth. So what is Ibn Rushd talking about? Where in this verse is principle number 2 being applied? Where's the word? Pick one word. From? No, it's not from. Sana. Wealth. Right? So the word wealth is a general word. When you say wealth, it means a person's wealth, all the money that they have. But was it intended to mean all the wealth that they have in terms of general? Or did it mean a portion or a small part of what was mentioned in a general wording? It's a small part. Right? So it's very similar. So if I say, for example, you know what? If I say, Yusuf grabbed my shirt. Okay? Yusuf cannot grab my entire shirt because his hand is not that big and my shirt is larger, right? So when I say Yusuf grabbed my shirt, it actually means he grabbed a portion of my shirt. But I used the word shirt. I didn't say Yusuf grabbed part of my shirt. So this is language that we use. So you'll find the same type of language that we use where you chose a word which was general. It could imply something much larger, but the intended meaning was actually something smaller and more specific, even though you decided to choose to use a more general word. Remember, we for those of you who took Islamic Law 103, we covered this in a lot of detail. This kind of like review for you. For those of you hearing it for the first time, it's kind of might be new. Yusuf, question? Oh, okay. Were you trying to grab my shirt from there? All right. Let's see. Example. Okay. Example of a specific wording intended to be general is evident in the words of the exalted. So now it's the opposite. Specific wording, what's known as khas, was intended to be am or general. Say not uff to them. It's talking about the parents. Do not say uff to them, nor repulse them, but speak to them a gracious word. So here it says this is the case of notification of something lesser over something greater, as the prohibition includes beating, abuse, and whatever is more grievous. So if somebody comes along and says, look, the verse says don't say oof to your parents, but that doesn't mean I can't beat them up, right? Because it said don't say oof. I didn't say oof. I just went and did something else to them. Obviously, or you put another swear word at them or something like that. So what does this mean? So he's saying this is an example of the category where a specific word was used, but it was actually intended to mean that this or anything above it in generality, right, was intended to mean it's not restricted to this, but it's actually much more general and much more broad than what was actually mentioned. So this is a third example of the thing that he was describing, right? And we'll skip the fourth one. So he says, demanding that something be done uses either so now we're on a different topic. So that's different usage of wording. So that's one of the reasons why scholars differ. Now he talks about another reason why scholars differ. Demanding that something be done. So if you're commanding somebody, so when Allah is commanding you in the Quran, or the Prophet is commanding you in one of his statements, and he's demanding that you do something, when he says it, it uses either the form of a linguistic command, what's known as amr. So when you say that, you say, sit down, that's a command. Don't sit down, that's a prohibition. So that's the linguistic form, right? So what if you said, take a seat? Linguistically, it's not a command, but it is a command when you understand the context in which you said it, right? In our culture at least, right? So what he's saying is, when you're demanding that something be done, either you're going to use the form of a linguistic command, an amr, saying sit down, eat that, don't eat that, or the form of a narration implying a command. So let's say there's some narration which is telling you, when zakah time comes, whoever pays it is going to be in paradise, and whoever doesn't pay it is going to be in the hellfire. There's no actual command. It's a narration or a story or a way of saying something, just like saying, take a seat is a command, right? Have a seat. Well, have is a command too. Let's focus on the story. Okay? So stick with the story. So saying it in a different way, which is not using the wording, verbal command, right? The actual wording of a command, but it still implies a command. Okay? So he's explaining that's the way it's going to happen. So whenever it's done, it's going to be used in two ways. Similarly, demanding the omission of an act employs the form of a linguistic prohibition, like don't eat that, right? Or don't eat pork, for example. Don't eat swine. Or the form of a narration implying prohibition. So same thing, it's going to be the opposite. If words occur in these linguistic forms, the question arises whether the demand for the commission of an act is to be interpreted as an obligation, what's known as wajib, or a recommendation, mandub, as will be discussed, or is the interpretation to be abstained from until another evidence indicates either one of the two. So who understood that? Okay, good. So let me explain this. All right, what this is saying is that when you see a statement in the Quran or in a hadith where the Prophet is saying something or Allah is saying something, and it's saying, do this, the question is asked, do you mean I have to do it or I should do it? And if he says, don't eat this, does it mean that I'm not allowed to eat this or that I shouldn't eat this? So he's saying that there is a difference of opinion among the jurists on this, recorded in books on usul al-fiqh. So there's a difference of opinion on which one it's automatically implying, or do we reserve judgment until we find some other evidence which is actually going to show us which one was originally intended. So he's saying this is another reason why scholars are going to differ. He said the same thing occurs with forms of prohibition, whether they indicate makruh, disapproval, or haram, something which is unlawful, or do not indicate either of the two. In this too, there is recorded a difference of opinion. And then this part of the book, which I skipped, is extremely complex. So you can thank me later, inshallah. And we'll move on from here and go to the kinds of rulings. So next part of the section. And this is really the key, why I wanted to focus on this part. So he says, the kinds of rulings acquired through these channels are 5. Obligatory, recommended, prohibited, disapproved, and permissible. So these are the 5 categories which we'd covered in Law 101, and many Muslims are familiar with this. There are things which are obligatory, you have to do them. They're recommended, you should do them. They're prohibited, you're not allowed to do them. They're disapproved, you should avoid them. And they're permissible. It doesn't matter whether you do it or you don't do it. There's no reward, there's no punishment for doing that. So he says the causes of the conflict of opinion, ikhtilaf, by classification are 6. So there are 6 main reasons why scholars differ. So he just gave us an intro in the beginning. Now he's going to get down to it. Let me tell you, he's going to say, I'm going to explain to you why they really differed in reality. Now, if you talk to people today, depending on which Muslim society you grew up in, many people are still under the notion that the only reason why Muslim scholars differ is because of the way that they graded hadiths. Right? One is authentic, one is not authentic. They didn't have knowledge about what was authentic, therefore we have to follow what's authentic. There are still people who believe that, or at least at one point in their life believe that. Is there anyone at one point in their life at least believe that that was the main cause? I did. Am I the only one? Okay, alhamdulillah, I'm not alone. So there are a few more people there, right? No? Yes? Anybody? Really? 3 people in the whole class? Or you guys are just being shy? Okay, so you've not been in Chicago, you've not lived in England. Okay, if you lived in Orange County, I can understand that. You know? So that can be, yeah.
Is it wrong to think that it was like the methodology in which they interpreted things?
No, that's great. That's what you're supposed to be thinking. So I'm just saying the minds of many people have been kind of taught to believe this. But I get if you guys have not been exposed to that, that's great. Yes, so you've seen a lot of people believing that in front of, yeah, exactly. So that is important. All right, so the first cause of why scholars differ is the fluctuating of the words between these 4 modes. So this is what he just said. The between general wording, which is meant to be specific wording, which implied generality, the general wording, which is sought for, implies generality, or that the word is present or absent with dalil khitab, which is an indirect indication of the communication. Skip that, you don't need to worry about that. Specific wording, but what is needed is the specific meaning, or there is present or absent. All right, so if the word one means one, then that's specific wording intended to be specific, right? Or 3 means 3, that's specific wording intended to be specific. So that's number 1. So all the wordings, whether it's a general word or a specific word, that makes a difference of how you interpret which word is which. So that's number 1 reason. Number 2 reason is the presence of ishtirak, similar vocal phrases, like we just saw. The swine of the sea and the swine in general. So this word has 2 different meanings. So he says this occurs sometimes in lafz mufrad, in an individual word. For example, the word period, or qur'un. This is qur'un. This should have an apostrophe here. So the word period, meaning like a woman's menstrual period, in Arabic, it says it's usually applied to both purity between her menstrual periods and to menstruation, her actual menstrual period, which are 2 obviously opposite things, completely opposite. So the word qur can actually mean the purity period, or it can also mean the menstruation period itself, with the blood coming out. So 2 opposite meanings. So which meaning is intended by that word? And that word is in the Quran. So which one was intended, this one or that one? Right? Without microphone. No microphone. You got it? All right. So similarly, the word command or amr, whether it's to be given the initial meaning of an obligation, sometimes is given the meaning of a recommendation. So the same thing he was talking about. When you command someone to do something, when you say sit down, are you recommending that they sit down, or are you demanding that they sit down? It can mean two different things depending on the context, right? So these are words which have two different meanings just linguistically. And likewise, the prohibition, whether it's to be given the meaning of prohibition or of disapproval. And then B, sometimes it occurs in lafz murakkab, in a compound word. So for example, in the words of Allah, they are transgressing except those who afterwards repent. It's chapter 24, verse 4 to 5. So he says, it is likely that this refers to the transgressing person, or the fasiq, only, and it is also possible that it refers to both the transgressor and the witness. Right? So where is the witness? In this verse, where is the witness? They is the witness? This one right here? So that's part of his question. So which one does it apply to, right? So he's saying it could be the transgressor, right? They are transgressing. Or it could be the witness and both, right? So where do you see witness in this verse at all? No, so this is what you do. What you do is you realize that Ibn Rushd actually quoted 2 verses, 24, 4 to 5. He decided not to quote the entire verse because he assumes that you already know this verse, because the vast majority of people who were reading his book during his lifetime, they'd already memorized the Quran when they were 7 years old. This was the standard practice at that time. So we're obviously not there. So what do we need to do? We need to go back to our research methodology class and look up these verses and see what they're saying. So what's the fastest way to look these up? We go to, which website did we say? Quran.com. That's right. So you go 24, 4 to 5. 24, 4 to 5. Figure out 4 to 5. Figure out what these verses are actually talking about. And those who accuse chaste women and then do not produce 4 witnesses, lash them with 80 lashes and do not accept from them testimony ever after. And those are the defiantly disobedient, except for those who repent thereafter and reform, for indeed Allah is forgiving and merciful. So now, back to the same question. Where is the witness? What is the witness talking about? The one who's giving false witness about a woman who's saying that she has committed adultery, but she has not committed adultery. Someone who's telling a lie, that's the false witness, right? So this person who's doing that, he's going to get a punishment. And then it says, and do not accept from them testimony ever after. Don't accept their testimony in a court of law ever on anything. Now what if they did this, 10 years later, they've been coming to the masjid for Fajr every day and they've never been late for 10 years. They've changed their whole life around. They're a totally different person. It says, do not accept from their testimony ever after. And those are the defiantly disobedient. Except for those who repent thereafter and reform. So does that apply to the witness as well? Or does it not apply to the witness? Right? For indeed Allah is forgiving and merciful. So here's what it says. Is it possible that it refers to the transgressor? Now who is a transgressor, right? So here's the thing. The defiantly disobedient is the word transgressor. Fasiqun. وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. So the question is this part of the verse? So this says, people who falsely accuse women are in the category of people who are defiantly disobedient. And then it says, people who are defiantly disobedient, right, except for the people who repent, who happen to be from the category of fasiqun, right? So the question is, are the witnesses included in the category of fasiqun when they're repenting? Is this exception meaning that they are removed from the category of being a defiantly disobedient person? Or are they removed from that category and their witness can be accepted again? Are they praying? Is that the adhan? Oh, okay. It's okay. It just sounded like they're praying. Okay. Huh? Yeah. We have 11 minutes. Yes. Okay. So does this make sense? So what it's saying is, here's the verse. So this is what it means by murakkab, meaning that we're not talking about one word which could have 2 meanings. We're talking about a phrase which could have 2 potential meanings depending on which part is connected with which one. So what it's saying is, someone who accuses chaste women, they are sinners, right? And they remain sinners except for the people who repent. The people who do this, their testimony is not going to be accepted, and they're sinners. And the sinners will not be forgiven unless they repent, right? So the question is, unless they repent, does it mean that they're going to be forgiven and they can have their testimony accepted again? Or only that they're forgiven, but the testimony still remains invalid because of the previous phrasing? There are 2 potential explanations of this linguistically. There are 2 ways to look at this. So that's what he's talking about, that is lafz murakkab. So he's saying, does it refer to, it is likely that this refers to the transgressing person, the fasiq. Meaning the fasiq who repents is not going to be in the same category of being a transgressing person anymore. It's also possible that it refers to what happened? Here. It also potentially refers to the person who's the witness. Thus, repentance can remove the consequences of transgression, and it can also permit the testimony of the slanderer. So the slanderer can start giving testimony again. There's two different opinions. So he's saying this is another reason why scholars differ. How to interpret two sentences, which could, when you connect them together, they could potentially have two different meanings. So this is another reason why scholars differ. Number 3, the third cause lies in the i'rab, or the different probabilities of the grammatical structure depending on how you dissect the actual grammar of the Arabic. So there could be a different way of understanding it. So similar to the second, but a little bit different. The fourth is the ability of the word to indicate its literal meaning, haqiqi, and an allegorical or metaphorical sense, majazi, it should be a z, resulting from an implied omission or addition, or from the reversal of the normal order of the sentence by advancing or deferring a word from its legitimate place, or it may be the vacillation of the word between its actual application and the figurative meaning. Okay, so I think that's self-explanatory, right? Is it? Or not? So this is what you're preparing for. So your final is going to be that you read something like this and you figure it out all on your own. But obviously you're not going to do that in the first class. So this is talking about literal meaning versus metaphorical meaning, haqiqi versus majazi. So I'll give you an example from that will make easy sense for you. You know how people say in our language all the time, they say, just give me a second. Just give me a second. Is it a second? Does anyone really take a second when they ask for a second? No. Are they a liar? Because they didn't actually, they took longer than a second. Or say, I'll be back in a flash. You can't even leave in a flash. You're not going to be back in a flash, right? So are you a liar? No, because you meant it metaphorically. You were trying to emphasize, I'm going to be back so quickly that it's almost going to appear like it's a second or a flash, or something like that. That's why we use this in our language. So the Quran, because this exists in almost all cultures, in all languages, the Quran, why should the Quran have to be purely literalistic in nature and only use haqiqi? It also uses majazi. It also uses metaphorical language. The Prophet, peace be upon him, also used metaphorical language because that's the language that people spoke. It's not a computer, program where he has to, speak in computer language, if-then statements or something like that. So that's not the way that he was. So that's why people differ, because the question is, was it intended to be literal, or the real meaning of the word, or was it intended to be metaphorical? So it's going to make a difference, and we've seen that in some of our other classes. The next one, the fifth cause, is the occasional use of the word in its absolute or unqualified, what's known as the mutlaq meaning, or in a qualified sense, the muqayyad meaning, like the unqualified use on occasions of the word al-itqu, and then qualifying it with the absolute taqeed, absolute qualification. This is where I got tired of retranslating the text and I just left it the way the author had it. So the beginning was more, was good, and so just skip this part, don't worry about this. It won't be on your final. The sixth cause, or go back to Islamic Law 3, your notes, we already covered this, muqayyad and mutlaq. The sixth cause is the conflict between two texts. Now this is very important, what's known as ta'arud. Ta'arud actually means contradiction. So the sixth is when you have a contradiction or a conflict or an apparent contradiction between two different texts, either between the Quran and another verse of the Quran, or a Quran and a hadith, or a hadith and a hadith, or something like that. So he's saying, in all kinds of words from which the law derives the rulings, ahkam. Moreover, the conflict may exist between reported acts, the acts of the Prophet, peace be upon him, or approvals, or between different kinds of analogy themselves. Or there may be two contradictions between two different analogies. So you make an analogy on one text, an analogy on another text, and there's a contradiction between them. How do you reconcile the two analogies? Does anybody remember? The method, istihsan, somewhat. So that's one of the ways of reconciling. So this is another thing, contradiction. Or the conflict may be between one of these four channels with another channel. That is, the conflict of a word with the reported act. So word says one thing and the act says something else. Or an approval or an analogy. The conflict of a reported act with approval or with qiyas or analogy. And the conflict of an approval with an analogy. So which one is stronger? Is an analogy on a verse of the Quran stronger, or an implied consent of the Prophet, peace be upon him, stronger? Because both of them have a sense of, did the Prophet really not say anything because of this, or did he not say anything because of some other reason? Is your analogy on the verse correct, or did you overuse your rationale to make the analogy on the verse? Which one is going to be stronger and take precedence over the other? So that's where the idea of contradiction comes in. It's not historical contradiction, like anachronism, for example, where two things cannot be. So we're not talking about contradiction between, you know what, this happened in the year 7, and another report says this happened in the year 8. Okay, there's no way you can reconcile that, because either it happened in 7 or 8, or the entire event lasted 2 years. So it happened 7 across the timeline to 8. But we're talking about things which appear to be contradictions. And these exist in real life. We addressed this before, but this exists in real life. So when you hear a contradiction, you should not think, oh my God, contradiction, Islamic sources are wrong, oh my God, everything is wrong. Contradiction is because your perception of what's happening and your usage of language, which is not specific and purely literal, is going to result in literary contradictions in what you say. And we do this all the time. We make statements which end up contradicting something else that we said because we didn't take into account every single possibility, right? So that's the thing. So if I told your brother, I said, don't use the microphone when making the adhan. So if he happened to have a megaphone and he picked up a megaphone and started making adhan, I said, what are you doing? I told you not to use the microphone. He said, no, you said microphone. You didn't say don't use a megaphone. I said, well, I implied that. That's what I had intended. So if I make another statement, one statement will contradict another statement because I didn't take into account every single instance or possibility in my statement. So there's naturally going to be contradictions because of human language. So that's what's going to happen here. So then he starts, after this brief discussion, we begin with our purpose, seeking the help of Allah, and to do so we start with the book of purification, as is customary with the jurists. So most Muslim scholars in the field of Islamic law, they always start with the book of purification. Now the book actually means a chapter, because his entire book is a book. But it's called the book in Arabic, Kitab al-Tahara. So we'll return after the prayer, and we'll start with the book of purification. Make sure you get some coffee after the prayer if you need it, inshallah. All right? Assalamu alaikum. Subhanallah. All right, let's get back to it. Inshallah. All right. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. So we're going to start with the book of purification, or the chapter of purification, actually. So he says, the Muslim jurists agreed that the shari'i, meaning the legal, Islamic law-based purity, or tahara, is of two types. So the scholars have agreed. Everything's looking good so far, right? They're all agreeing there's two types of purification. Purity from hadath, or what's known as, what he translates as ritual impurity. I translate it as, I think in my book, I don't even remember, I forgot what I translated it as. I think spiritual impurity or something like that. Or legal impurity. Maybe symbolic. Did I? I actually forgot. No, I didn't put ceremonial. No. Anyways, whatever it was in the book, purity from hadath and purity from khabath, or physical impurity. So what does that mean? Ritual impurity, what he's talking about here, or spiritual impurity, or symbolic impurity, is basically when you need to make wudu, right? There's no physical impurity on your body, but you still need to purify yourself. So that's called hadath. And then purity from khabath, which is physical impurity, there's actually some blood on your hand, or some vomit, or on your shirt, or something like that. There's actual physical impurity on your body which you need to remove. So they all agreed that there's two types of impurities. They also agreed, right, that purity from hadath, the first one, is of three types. With ablution or wudu, by bathing, or what's called ghusl, or the substitute for one of these, which is known as tayammum, ablution with clean earth, tayammum, or dry ablution. This is because of their inclusion in the verse of ablution or wudu, which dealt with these issues. So we shall begin out of these with a discussion on wudu. So he's saying we're going to begin with wudu. So here's what we say. How did that happen? Here we go. All right. Here we go. So the book of wudu, or the section on wudu. A comprehensive discussion of the principles of this type of worship is covered in 5 chapters. So he's going to cover wudu in 5 chapters. Chapter 1 will relate to the evidence of its obligation. How do we know that you need to make wudu? Where's the evidence that it's an obligation? Number 2, evidence of its obligation, and on whom is it obligatory, and when is it obligatory? Chapter 2 is about the identification of its acts, how you do it. Chapter 3 is about the identification of that with which it is performed, which is water. So what kind of water do you use? Chapter 4 is about the identification of factors which nullify it, meaning what makes you lose your wudu. And chapter 5 is about the identification of things with which it can be performed. Right? So that's different than, I guess, with which it is performed, with which it can be performed. I'm not sure what the difference between chapter 3 and 5 is.
So they're referring to the physical aspect of what you could use.
Okay, the physical aspect with which you can use. Okay, that probably could be the case, yeah. So we're not covering all these chapters. I just wanted to explain to you how Ibn Rushd begins his book, and how he breaks it down and says, here's what the scholars agreed on. And then now we're going to talk about what they disagreed on. So they did agree upon the most important things. They disagreed on the small little details. But since we only focus on disagreements, you may start thinking everything is a disagreement. It's not. It's just the fact that you're focusing on the disagreements. That's the point of the class. So don't get lost and confused regarding that. Chapter 1, the evidence of its obligation. How do you know that you need to perform wudu before you pray or whatever it is? So he says the evidence of its obligation is in the Quran, It's in the Sunnah, meaning the Hadith. It's in Ijma', which is the consensus of Muslim scholars. It is, and that was explained in Law 103. So like when you have the consensus of scholars, it has a binding weight. In the Quran, it's in the words of the Exalted. O you who believe, when you rise up for prayer, wash your faces and your hands up to the elbows, and lightly rub your heads, and wash your feet up to the ankles. So this is the verse in the Quran which talks about wudu. The Muslim jurists agreed that obedience to this communication is obligatory for each person on whom prayer is obligatory when it is time for its performance. So meaning all Muslim scholars have agreed this verse is not a recommendation. This verse is an obligation. There's no difference of opinion. There's consensus on this. There's ijma' on this. Right? Then he says, in the Sunnah, it is the words of the Prophet, God's peace and blessings be upon him, that Allah neither accepts prayers without purity nor charity out of pure-loined wealth of spoils. So this part of the hadith is important. Allah neither accepts prayers without purity. So Allah does not accept prayers without having the right purity. So you have to purify yourself. So this is the hadith. And in his saying, meaning another hadith, Allah does not accept prayers from one who has acquired hadath, that state of impurity, till he performs ablution or wudu. So you have two hadith on the subject. Question? No, it should be on topic. Please keep it on topic, inshallah. Right. So actually, that is off topic. So inshallah, you can ask at the end of class. Inshallah. Okay. Huh? Yeah, it will be coming today anyway. We probably will discuss it today if we can get to it, or next week. All right. So this is in the Sunnah. It is okay. So we covered two hadiths here. Allah does not accept prayers from the 100%. These two traditions. Remember, they're translating tradition as hadith. Hadith is translated as tradition. And I mentioned in our prophetic wisdom class that it's a bad translation and we should stop using it. And I, wrote a whole thing about it. So these two prophetic narrations are authentic according to the leading scholars of hadith. Right? So I'll just automatically substitute in the translations for you. So he's saying both of these hadith are considered authentic by the leading scholars. Its evidence in ijma', meaning in consensus, is based on the absence of a transmission from any of the Muslims disputing its obligation. So he's saying, what is the proof that Muslim scholars have a consensus that wudu is mandatory? You're not going to find a single Muslim, let alone a Muslim scholar, anywhere that's going to say, oh, you don't really need to make wudu before you pray. And then he says, had there been a dispute, it would necessarily have been transmitted because of the demands of practice. What does the demands of practice mean? It's what? The salah. What is demands of practice? Practice of prayer? That's a good guess actually, but it's not exactly what it means. Demands of practice. Not that necessarily. There's no way you can figure it out directly, but you can guess it. Yeah. Exactly. Meaning, how many times do we make wudu? All the time. How many people are there that make wudu on a daily basis? It's everyone, right? So it's such a demand, meaning it keeps on happening consistently. This is not like a once in a year event. This happens on a daily basis in the lives of millions of Muslims. So it's so regular and frequent that had there been any difference of opinion, it would have been documented somewhere. And you don't have it documented means that it's very, very strongly believed that there's no one has ever contradicted this, which is a very important principle of ijma'. So this is this is one way that we look at. It's important to look at history and look at his reasoning. Recently, an issue arose in the community. I'm not going to mention what the issue is, but some scholar wrote an article and he said, you know what? This is something that your Muslims are doing which no one has ever done in the past. And when he wrote that article and he gave a long reasoning behind it, and some of you obviously know what it is, right? People jumped on him and they said, you cannot invoke this principle. That just because people in the past didn't do it doesn't mean that we can't do it now. That has no weight, it has no basis, it has no validity. Because for us, in our society, what are we taught? We need to innovate, we need to be creative, we need to think of new things. Now that may be the case when it comes to science and technology and new buildings and new means of doing things and all of that. But going back to the principle of Ibn Rushd, he's saying if something was done regularly, and if there was a difference of opinion about it, and it was something that would have been documented, it would have been documented along these lines, right? In the sense that this something would have happened. So the principle, this is a very important principle as long as you utilize it correctly and in the right way. So keep in mind all these principles while you're reading these things. Think about how they apply to other issues, not only to this issue, right? So we're not learning it just for this issue. We're learning it as a principle so that you can actually apply it to other issues. Those on whom it is obligatory. So I'll stop for a moment here. Take an online request to go back to number 6. All right. So number 6, the sixth cause is a conflict between two texts. So basically, without going into too much detail, don't worry too much about the details, but what it means is that when there appears to be an apparent conflict between two different texts, you have to favor one over the other for some reason or some evidence. And that's basically what the sixth cause is talking about. Okay? So that's pretty much what number 6 means. If you have a specific question about it, just go ahead and type it in, or you can ask it. All right, back to where we were. Those on whom it is obligatory. So who has to perform wudu? People who are sane and people who are pubescent, meaning that they have reached the age of maturity. Right? This too is established through sunnah. There's hadiths about it, and ijma'. There's a consensus of all Muslim scholars regarding it. In the sunnah, it is found in the words of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the pen, meaning the liability, has been lifted from the case of 3 people. And then he mentioned the minor until he reaches the age of puberty, the insane person until he recovers, and where's the third one? He skipped the third one. So there's 3 anyways. So this is a hadith. So where is the important thing about the hadith? The minor until he reaches the age of puberty. So the hadith is that the pen, meaning writing down of deeds, the liability has been lifted in the case of a minor, someone who's a child, until they reach the age of maturity. Therefore, they're not obligated to perform wudu. There is no transmitted controversy about its proof in ijma'. Same principle he uses. The jurists, meaning jurists or fuqaha, are specialists in Islamic law. The jurists disagreed whether Islam is a requisite condition for its obligation. Meaning, do you have to be a Muslim in order to perform wudu or not? If you're not a Muslim, will your wudu still count or will it not count? And this is something that Muslim scholars debated and discussed. And I love Ibn Rushd's opinion on this. He says, this is an issue that is of little benefit in fiqh, since it relates to the ruling on the hereafter. So we're just going to skip it completely. Why would you discuss whether a non-Muslim, his wudu counts or not? He's not praying. He doesn't have to pray. What's the point of discussing this in the first place? So he says, we're just going to skip that one. But scholars have actually discussed this. I'm sure someone has written some master's or PhD dissertation on it somewhere because the university had extra funding to, waste it or blow it on a thesis like that. So he skips that. He says, ablution becomes obligatory when it's time for prayer. So you need to make wudu when it's time for prayer, or when a person has intended an act for which the wudu is a requisite condition, even if the act is not associated with the fixed time. So what's another case where somebody needs to have wudu that we covered in a previous class? The Quran, like touching the Quran, right? A copy of the Quran. About its obligation upon a person who's in a state of hadath, when it is time for prayer, there is no controversy because of the words of the Exalted, meaning Allah. O you who believe, when you rise up for prayer, wash your faces and your hands up to the elbows and lightly rub your heads and wash your feet up to the ankles. Same verse of the Quran that we just talked about, right? So he's saying the obligation upon a person who's in a state of hadith when it's time for prayer, there is no controversy that he needs to do it. So when it's time for prayer, he needs to make wudu. Thus, wudu is made obligatory at the time of prayer, meaning when you want to pray, you're about to start the prayer. And one of the conditions for the validity of prayer is the commencement of the time of prayer. So you have to, make the prayer within the time of prayer, obviously. With respect to the evidence of its obligation at the time of intending an act for which it is a condition, the discussion will be taken up under the description of the acts for which ablution is required, along with the narration of the differences among the jurists over this. Right, so now he's going to get into the different acts of wudu. So the reason why I put that part in there, we've not even covered any differences of opinion. I put that in there to show you how Ibn Rushd wants to approach a chapter and kind of give you a holistic understanding of everything that's involved in terms of what you use to make wudu, why you make wudu, when you make wudu, whether it's obligatory, all of that. So he talked about all of that and like the foundation, and then he gets into the detailed issues now. So he's going to start with the actions of wudu. The source for the identification of the acts of wudu is the description laid down in the words of the Exalted. O you who believe, when you rise up for prayer, wash your faces and your hands up to the elbows, and lightly rub your heads and wash your feet up to the ankles. So the same verse, we've seen it already 3 times. And the method of performing wudu traced to the Prophet, peace be upon him, in the established narrations. So he's saying everything we need to know about wudu are based on this one verse of the Quran and all the other hadiths, prophetic narrations, which talk about the Prophet saying something or doing something about wudu. To this, there are related 12 well-known issues that resemble fundamental principles. So there are 12 main issues in the way that wudu is performed that scholars have discussed, and they actually represent fundamental principles of how you make wudu, and that's what he wants to cover. We're only going to cover one of them, of the 12, but just to show you how he breaks it down. And then he says, they are related to the identification of the requisite conditions, the elements of the wudu, the description of the acts of the wudu, their number, their specification, and the identification of the objects of the rulings of all these things. All right, so don't worry what that is. He's trying to break it down for his own notes. He went through everything, and then he went back and categorized it. Remember, this is an Aristotelian thinker. It's what Aristotle does. He groups everything in logic. He's, like specialist in logic, kind of like the father of modern law or classical logic, and break everything down into categories. So that's what so he's influenced obviously by this, which is nice. When you understand it, you're like, oh, that's cool. So here we go. Issue number 1. So this is what we're going to start with. Issue number 1. Is the niyyah or the intention a requisite condition for wudu? So what does that mean? Do you actually have to have the intention of performing the wudu in order for it to count or not? Right? So why would anybody care? Is this even like a relevant issue at all? It is or it isn't? Who says yes, it's relevant? Okay. Keep your hands up. Sister Maryam, where is it relevant in my life? When would I ever care about this?
About the intention?
Yeah, why would I care? Okay, let's say intention is a necessity, intentions are not a necessity. Where would I care about this in my life? Every time I walk up to the sink and I start making wudu, I know what I'm doing, right? So I obviously have the intention when I'm doing it. I'm not going to ever just zone out completely and I just happen to be making like perfect wudu and everything's going and my intention is something completely different. So why is this relevant for me?
I think it's relevant because everything that you start to do, it sort of becomes just a habit. And so if you remove your intentions and you actually state what you're going to do, then it puts you in that mental state or that, like, okay, I'm going to do this and this is why I'm doing it.
Okay, so she's saying that having the intention is going to help you like focus on what you're doing and have like a purity of what you're doing, of intention, like you're doing it for the right reason and all of that. Okay, but meaning meaning that yes, in the case that yes, we should have the right intentions whenever we do something, but that's not the issue. So the issue here is, if you did not have the intention while you are making wudu, your wudu doesn't count according to one opinion. Does that matter? Where does it matter? Give me an example of when you made wudu and you didn't have the intention. No, I'm still focusing on Maryam. Good, good, exactly. You're taking a shower, right? And you're just like whatever, and just water's getting all over you. And then like 1 hour later, you're like, you know what? Did I make wudu? Well, I took a shower, but I had no intention to make wudu, but everything got wet. So that's one example. Good. That's what I was looking for. Is there a second example where it's relevant to my life or anybody else's life? Exactly. You jump in a pool, and then 2 hours later, somebody says, hey, do you have wudu? Well, I was in a pool. Did you dunk your head in, or did you just keep your head out? This makes a difference, right? So yeah, you didn't have the intention, so does it count or it doesn't count? So it can become very relevant, even though for some people they may not see the relevancy in it until they encounter a situation like that. So it's important to realize that things may not always seem relevant to you. They may be relevant to you, or they may be relevant to somebody else, but you may have not encountered that situation. So just be cautious of that. All right, so the jurists disagreed whether intention is a condition for the validity of wudu, although they had agreed on the stipulation of intention as a condition for worship. Okay, so follow this. The scholars agreed that whenever you're doing an act of worship, you have to have the intention, otherwise your act of worship does not count. So you cannot accidentally, without having the intention of praying, somehow pray. It's not going to count, right? If you intended to do something else, let's say you are demonstrating prayer in front of a group of people to show them what a prayer looks like, but you're not actually praying. You don't have the intention. Can your prayer count? No, your prayer cannot count because it's an act of worship, and it cannot count as an act of worship. Yes.
If you're praying, like you have the intention of praying, but you did not articulate the intention.
No, but that's a whole different issue. That's a completely different issue. The issue is not what intention is. The issue is whether you have an intention or not. Verbal or non-verbal, how much concentration do you have or no concentration, that's not the issue. The issue is just generally the meaning of intention, and we're not going to get into intention. All right? So that's pretty much what we're talking about. So they said you have to have the intention when something is an act of worship. So for example, if you, in the month of Ramadan, you get knocked out at 3 a.m. somehow, and you wake up at 9 p.m., were you fasting? Because you didn't eat anything, technically, right? Let's say it's the first day of Ramadan. Let's say you got knocked out for 3 days, 2 days prior to Ramadan and the first day of Ramadan. And you didn't even know what's going on. You had no intention of fasting. You didn't know this was going to happen to you. Does that fast count? Because technically you didn't eat or drink. No, because you didn't have the intention. So yes, you're right. You didn't eat, you didn't drink, you didn't have intimacy, but you didn't have the intention of actually performing the act of worship either. So it does not count for you. So that's what they agreed upon. They said all scholars agreed on this. If it's an act of worship, you have to have the intention. How did they come to that conclusion? Because the words of the exalted in the Quran, and they are ordered nothing else than to serve Allah, keeping religion pure for Him. They said from this verse, meaning that people have been ordered nothing else except to serve Allah, making sure that the religion is pure for Him, sincerely just for Him, not for anybody else. So these are acts of worship, and they inferred from that verse, the intention or the niyyah is a necessity for acts of worship. And they also got it, the same principle, they got it from a saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, which says the value of acts depends upon accompanying intentions. And then he says, which is a well-known tradition or well-known prophetic narration. Okay? So the value of acts depends on your intention. They're saying that was referring to acts which are acts of worship. So this is where they got the principle from. So now he says a group of jurists, including Ash-Shafi'i, Malik, Hammad, Abu Thawr, and Dawood, was of the opinion that it is a condition. Meaning intention is a condition for wudu to be valid. So who are these people? Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about these people. So who is, let's start with Ash-Shafi'i. Well, they're all in one sentence, right? Shafi'i, Malik, Hammad, Abu Thawr, Dawud. Let me start with Malik. So Imam Malik is a famous scholar. He lived in Medina. He died in 179 Hijri. So he was 2nd century scholar. He lived in Medina. He studied under Imam Abu Hanifa, under Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, under Imam al-Zuhri. And he was a founder of the famous Maliki school of thought. The Maliki school of thought is obviously was spread in Spain. Spain was dominant Maliki school of thought. Also North Africa, across the board with the exception of Egypt. They tend to always be their separate region. They pretty much were followers of the Maliki school. You find them all the other parts of generally Northern Africa, Mauritania, and everything lower than that. And also, interestingly, United Arab Emirates happens to be Malikis today. And it's pretty widespread school of thought throughout history. Okay, so that is Imam Malik and that is his school. So that's when it says Malik, we're talking about Imam Malik ibn Anas, who's a famous scholar, lived in the 2nd century. Imam al-Shafi'i is a student of Imam Malik and a student of other people as well. So he studied with Imam Malik in Medina. He studied with Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani in Baghdad. Eventually he moved to Egypt and he changed his opinions and he started a new school when he was in Egypt. And he started a school of thought, his own school of thought. Imam al-Shafi'i is generally followed in Indonesia, Malaysia, Egypt, Yemen, southern India, Somalia, Syria, and other parts of the Muslim world. So pretty widespread school of thought and a very influential figure as well.
When you say that people from a certain region follow him, or do you mean the scholars, or do you just mean like is everybody?
Okay, so the question is, does that mean the people in certain regions follow him? Does that mean the scholars or everyone? Generally, it means both, scholars and everyone. So that even the scholars, they generally tend to lean towards this way of thinking. All right. So that's Shafi'i. And then you have Hammad. So Hammad is Hammad ibn Abi Sulaiman. He died in 120. So he's 120 Hijri. So he's a very early scholar. And he's being mentioned because he was a teacher of Imam Abu Hanifa, who's a famous scholar as well. Hammad was a student of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, who takes his line from Ibn Mas'ud. So he's a very, very early scholar, a specialist in the field of Islamic law as well as hadith. So he was kind of one of the scholars who had his own school of thought, but it didn't last. It didn't make it to our day. So he mentions him because of how prominent he was. So he's quoting scholars who are very, very prominent scholars, even though their school of thought may not have survived up until our day. You have Abu Thawr, who also had his own school of thought, but it did not survive to our day. He died in 240. He was from Baghdad, and he studied in, I won't even mention all these other information. But basically, Abu Thawr was another great scholar. And then you have Dawood. So we've seen Dawood, right? This is Dawood al-Zahiri. This is the literalist guy. The guy who started the literalist school. He's also in their camp, right? So all of them, Shafi'i, Malik, Hammad ibn Abi Sulaiman, Abu Thawr, and Dawood al-Zahiri, they all held the opinion that having the intention for wudu is a condition. And your wudu doesn't count if you didn't have the intention. You're swimming in a pool and you come out and you're like, I have wudu. No, you don't, according to these people. Your prayer does not count if you try to pray. So this is their opinion. Another group said, it is not a condition. And this is the opinion of Abu Hanifa. So Abu Hanifa, let's see, where's his bio? Imam Abu Hanifa is, subhanAllah, I didn't even write his bio. Anyways, he died in 150, a very famous scholar from Kufa, and he was the founder of the Hanafi school of thought. Right, so today there exists 4 famous schools of thought which are still prevalent. There's the Hanafi school, the Shafi'i school, the Maliki school, and then there's the Hanbali school. All right. So what you're going to notice is that oftentimes Ibn Rushd kind of skips over the Hanbali school of thought. And there's a reason for that. Because in Spain, they didn't consider the Hanbali school of thought as a fourth school of thought. They considered it as, they respect the Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, but they did not really see it as being a school of thought. They thought it was just, this is an independent scholar who had his verdicts, but it wasn't really considered to be a school at the time. So it's interesting how, canons develop, they go shorter, and then schools, acceptable schools grow, and then acceptable schools get kind of taken out in circulation. So that's Abu Hanifa. And Thawri, Sufyan al-Thawri, he died in also around the same time. He founded his own school of thought, but his school of thought didn't survive, and he was in the city of Basra. So Abu Hanifa and al-Thawri said it is not a condition. And we're going to keep seeing these names again and again and again. That's why I'm explaining them in some detail. I'm not going to keep explaining them again, just one time. Okay? So these are very, very famous scholars. Most of them are living around the 2nd or the 3rd century. So early scholars, because these are the ones who kind of built up the edifice of Islamic law. All the intellectual heritage of all these discussions happened during their time. Right? So he says, Ibn Rushd says, the reason for their disagreement is the vacillation of the term wudu between being a pure ritual ibadah or an active worship. Right? So he's saying they disagreed. Does the word wudu or even the concept of washing yourself and purifying yourself with wudu, it varies back and forth between being a pure active worship that you're only doing for Allah, I mean not subject to rationalization, meaning there's no purpose behind doing, like there's no underlying wisdom of why you're washing your hand. You could have been washing your shoulder instead of your arm, but just because Allah told you to do it, there's no wisdom of washing your arm per se. Right? So this is what it's saying. That would be a pure act of worship. Right? Why are you washing this part of the body? Just because Allah said so. Your mind cannot understand why this is happening at all. Right? So that's what he's saying, if that was the case. Right? So rationalization and intended only for the pleasure of Allah. You're only doing it for the pleasure of Allah, just like prayer. You do prayer just for the pleasure of Allah. There's no other reason you're doing it. And similar forms of mere ritual worship. Something is purely done only for Allah. There's no rationalization that you get into in terms of the details of why you do it. So it vacillates between this and between being an act of worship that can also be rational, like the washing away of dirt. So when you have blood on your clothes, you're not allowed to pray, but you have to wash the blood off. Now when you're doing that, you understand why you're washing the blood off. It makes sense because there's something impure on your clothes, you need to wash it off. So does wudu, this is an analogy, does wudu resemble the prayer more? Where you cannot apply analogy on prayer, right? You cannot make analogies and say, well, because of this reason I'm going to do this. But when it comes to washing impurities off of you, it's a rational thing. You can understand why you're doing it. You use water or use vinegar or whatever you use, it's going to remove the impurity. So he's saying, which one does it resemble more? Right? So this is what he's trying to say. So this is the reason why they differed. They did not differ about pure ibadah, pure acts of worship, being in need of intention. So they were clear on that. And rational ibadah, not being in need of it. So when you understand and there's a purpose behind it, it's still an act of worship. But it's not a pure act of worship. Meaning like 100% in the sense that you can't figure out, why this is happening or all of that. And not being in need of it. So they agreed, if it's 100% purely only for Allah and you can't figure out why this is happening, then you have to have the intention, and vice versa, right? So Ibn Rushd, at the end, he says, wudu has a resemblance to both kinds of worship, and a disagreement has therefore resulted. That's the problem, is that wudu has both aspects to it. So think about that for a moment, right? You wash your arms, you wash your face, you wash your feet, you wipe your head, and then you pass some gas. Now you have to wash your arm again when you make a wudu the next time, right? Now, how did the passing of gas affect your arm? Right? Imagine you put your arm in some kind of special thing which like blocks any particles from affecting it. It's like in this special cage or the special, laboratory where you put your arm in and it's airtight, nothing can get in there, and then you pass gas. And there's no way this has mixed with what happened to the rest of your body. And then they release you from this machine. When you make wudu again, do you have to wash this arm? Yes, you do. So from that aspect, it's not rational. But from the other aspect, why are you washing your arms and your face and this and that, but you're not washing your chest, you're not washing your back, you're not washing your shoulders? So what is the reason behind the arms and the feet and all of that? Most probably is because these are the things which are exposed. When you wear clothes, when you walk around, you move and you do things, the parts that are generally exposed are your arms, your hands, your head, your face. These are the things which are going to get dirt and dust on them, and you kind of purify yourself in that sense. So there's an aspect of symbolism, and there's an aspect of, you're cleaning parts which kind of makes sense why these parts were chosen rather than other parts. So Ibn Rushd gives you his opinion at the end. And he says, the reason is that it combines ritual worship and purification. The aim of fiqh, meaning trying to figure out what Islamic law is to examine which one it resembles more strongly so that it may be linked to it. So that's his opinion. So that's kind of a joke, meaning that he's not giving you his opinion, right? He's going to tell you basically that the right answer, if you're trying to figure out what is the right answer, because this is what we usually want, right? Whenever we hear all these different opinions, so just tell me which one do I follow. So Ibn Rushd says, okay, let me tell you which one you follow. You follow the one which it resembles more. And he leaves you with that. And, some people, I remember when I was studying this first with my teacher, everyone in the class was upset. Come on, you got to tell us which one is it though? Which one is correct? Which one is right? And Ibn Rushd told you in the beginning, he wrote this to teach you how to think, not to give you his own opinions on what he thinks. Sometimes he will, and sometimes he'll say it like very strongly. Very seldom though. But he's not interested in convincing you about his own opinion. He's training you to think for yourself someday so that you're going to understand issues that you're never going to be encountering, or you may not have the opportunity to ask someone about. Okay?
Maybe, I'm not sure if it was covered in a previous CIS class, but maybe what, let's say, the Shafi'is say about that distinction that was just made about it not being necessarily an act of worship comparable to something like Salah. So is there like a back and forth conversation, or is it just we think this and they think that, and that's it, and then you just make up your mind?
I don't understand what your question.
So is there do the Shafi'is ever address the, Hanafi?
Oh, I see. Yes. So does the Shafi'i school or the Hanafi school, do they address the opposite arguments? Yeah, there are volumes and volumes filled with more discussion. No, we're not going to get into it. We're only looking at the core reason of why they differed, but not why each, because what's going to happen now, this is the core reason. You noticed that he didn't even bring a single hadith or verse of the Quran to prove either side. He only brought a verse of the Quran and hadith to prove what they already agree on. So now what's going to happen is, in their own debates, they're going to bring all their verses and hadith, and they're going to bring all their verses and hadith and say, this is why we're right and this is why we're right, and it's going to go back and forth. But Ibn Rushd is saying this has already happened. And you can sit there and you can read all of that, and you might become confused. I'm going to break it down for you and say the underlying reason which all their arguments are built is actually on this one point. So that's what he wants you to learn.
So maybe if we don't want to read volumes and volumes, but we just want a little bit more information as to why we think that, is there a place where we can...
Yeah, you go to any of the books of the Shafi'i school, which has proofs in them, and read this issue. And then go to the books of the Hanafi school or the Maliki school and read the proofs in them. And you'll see all of them going back and forth with all their other evidences. No, he quoted I said, right, what I'm saying, he didn't quote a single hadith about the difference of opinion. The hadith about intentions was what they agreed upon. So he didn't quote a hadith on ones that they used against them. He only quoted the hadith that they agreed upon. Yeah.
Can we say that he probably thinks that it's not, that he agrees with Imam Malik and Maliki?
He most likely does agree with Imam Malik because he is a Maliki, but he does not always go with Imam Malik. So sometimes he'll tell you when he does, and sometimes he won't tell you when he goes against him.
And is that okay? That's fine.
That's fine, because this is, remember, in CIS we did 2 Islamic law classes on what you're supposed to follow in your life. This was already taught. So if you remember, in Islamic law 1, you took Islamic law 1, right? Who took Islamic law 1? So what's the opinion that we took in class? It's not needed. Right, so we took the Hanafi school. Where did we talk about that?
He said that like you come in a state of purification because the water is showing you whether you like made an intention or not, but you miss out on like the benefits of the
Right. Okay. Did we actually specify that in class? Yeah. Okay. So we did specify. I was just wondering, 'cause in the book it's not specified. Right. Right. Okay, so somebody probably asked me that question. Okay, good. So yeah, we did cover it, but we also covered it in another way. So in the book, it doesn't say that wudu is a prerequisite, which means that it's not a prerequisite, according to what's being taught. Otherwise, it would have been listed there. Right? Meaning, I'm sorry, not wudu. The intention is not a prerequisite for wudu. So it wasn't listed that it's a prerequisite. It's assumed that you don't need to have it. That's the way the book was written. So yeah. No, but it's not talking. It's not talking about that. So it's saying, depending if wudu resembles the prayer more, or if it resembles the cleaning of the impure substances from your body more. No, not the details of wudu. Just the general principle of wudu, the concept of wudu, general concept of wudu. Yeah. The order of the wudu is another issue that he brings up. Yeah. Right, but this is unrelated. This is completely unrelated. This is abstract concept. This is not related to the direct details of that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on this? No one online? Okay. 2. Well, we're not covering that one. Are we almost done? Okay, we'll start with one more. No, we don't even have time for one more. So we'll basically, see that one? So this is what you're going to be doing. You're going to be outlining just like this. So now, who wants to go back and actually reread that? It's probably not going to be the funnest thing. So instead, what you can do is you have this template here. So purification, whether intention is a requisite condition for wudu. That's the issue. All right? So what you do is you highlight the issue. Sometimes the issue is not in the title properly. So you put the issue, is intention a prerequisite for wudu? So that's the issue. What did scholars agree on? Okay? They agreed that intention is a condition for acts of worship, and it's not for non-worship. So this is what scholars agreed on. So you put that in one line. What is the textual evidence that they cited? And they are ordered not else that to serve Allah. You put the reference. You got your text. Textual evidence, hadith. The value of acts depends upon accompanying intentions. It's a hadith, and he said it's well known. He didn't give you the grading. He didn't tell you what book it's in. You just write down from his book, it's well known. So he left it at that. Opinion number 1. Intention is a condition for wudu. Who said it? Shafi'i, Malik, Hamad, Abu Thawr, and Dawood. What is their reasoning? Wudu is like salah, like prayer. That's proof number one. And worship is not subject to rationalization, so no analogy is allowed. So this is their explanation. Opinion number two, intention is not a condition. Who said it? Abu Hanifa and Ath-Thawri. What is their reasoning? Wudu is like washing impurities, which doesn't require intention. So that's the underlying reason. What is the cause for the difference of opinion? Can you make an analogy on an act of worship? Or do you make an analogy on an act of worship or on the act of cleanliness when you're cleaning yourself? Something like that. And Ibn Rushd's own personal opinion is that wudu combines both aspects of worship and non-worship, must determine which one it resembles more. So this is one way of outlining. So basically what I want you to do is I want you to download this template and have the same thing. Every issue we cover, you're going to write the issue and obviously replace this text. You write what they agreed upon and replace this text. You put the textual evidence that you find. You put the opinion. You put the evidence. You put who said the opinions. So what you're going to find is this was one of the very, very easy issues. Probably the easiest issue we're ever going to cover in class. The other issues are very convoluted, and what happens is sometimes he'll mention in the beginning, Imam Shafi'i and Malik said this, then he'll mention proof, then he'll mention something else, then he'll talk about something else, and at the end, oh, by the way, Dawood and Sufyan al-Thawri said this, right? So you need to recombine that into a nice little template. Why? Why did he do that? Because these are his personal notes. He can do that. But you can't do that because you need to have a proper outline because you're going to be graded on that, right? Before I forget though, very interesting. Yeah, I'll mention it later. Never mind. That's fine. 3 questions. Okay.
First one is, these templates you have, all of our outlines are going to look like really similar.
Yes, so these templates we have, almost all of your outlines will look very similar. In terms of the wording or the format? Format, I want you to copy the exact same format. I've only done 2 issues for you, by the way. So for these two, the wording is going to be very similar, but try to do it on your own.
Second is, would you recommend compiling this stuff in that format during class?
That's a good question. The question is, would I recommend compiling this stuff during class? That you actually make the outline during class? Actually, no. Not just to make your life more difficult. Not just because, so one, I want you to reread it, and 2, because I have a friend who actually is in UCI researching this right now, that when they actually did some research studies at UCI very recently in the education department, that when you're actually typing on a computer versus when you're writing, you're actually focusing more when you're writing, because when you're typing, you're more distracted because of the way that you type faster and all of it. There's a long reason behind it. So what's going to happen is if you do that in class, you're going to become distracted from the discussion and miss certain parts while you're trying to compile and format your outline. And you're not going to get the same level of comprehension. So if you want to, then you have to go back home and then you have to maybe reread or re-watch the video. Now, which one is shorter, rereading or re-watching the video? No, but you don't know which part you missed because you were concentrating on this the whole time back and forth. So which one is technically faster? Reading, exactly. So it saves you time that way. 3rd question.
Since he doesn't go into a lot of depth of the reasoning behind both positions,
Only on this issue. He will go into more depth.
just is there any time for class discussions of the 2 sides where you like explain the reasonings?
On some issues, we will go into more detailed reasonings. Like, for example, women being an imam and those kind of things. We will definitely go into more detail because they're really controversial topics in the community. And the rest of them, if we probably will not have time. But if you ever want to make an office hours appointment and discuss any issue with me, I'm open, inshallah. Okay, any other questions? Yeah. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, the same one. So you're going to do this one outline, which you happen to have the answer right in front of you, but you're going to do it again in your own words. So because we only covered 1 today, you're just going to do 1 for next week. Yeah, make it a little bit more detailed. You know, store up your energy for the rest of the class. Inshallah, yes.
You know, on syllabus it says that page number and then certain like 3 to 4, the first one, and but we covered from 1 to 4. So that's what we are gonna do it when we do the outline. That we would just follow that certain particular, you know, because it's very
Yeah.
precise here.
Yeah, so just follow the syllabus in terms of what you need to do for the outline. Very specific. So that issue that's mentioned, you only follow that issue. So for example, look at the syllabus here. Where'd it go? What does the syllabus say?
1126, like wiping heads.
Right here. So see this 1.1.2.2 is not on your syllabus, right? So you skip this completely because I only included this page because of the last paragraph from the previous one. So only do the numbers that are actually listed on your syllabus, which is 1.1.2.1. Not even 1.1.2. Just the 1.1.2.1.
Another thing is, can we just do the handwritten, the outline, and then scan it and submit?
You want to do handwritten outline? No, I'm going to insist on it has to be in computer form. It's going to help you to get the computer skills, inshallah.
For me, it just becomes more easy when I do because I can just do it without anybody's help.
I know, but
Sometimes it starts on scan
y-
or it's due and
in this world, you got to get used to the computers. So it's going to help you, inshallah. Just do it. Sister Cheryl is there to help, inshallah. Other questions? Any other questions? Okay, last question, yeah. Sister Alexis. No, outline is due next Tuesday before class, 6:59. 6:59, don't wait until the last minute, okay? And don't take that literally and say, oh, you mean Lahiri, 6:58, if you don't wait until the last minute. All right, so meaning like submit by 5 p.m. or something like that. Yeah, you might lose 20% if your computer clock is wrong or something. That's not our problem. Yeah. No, you submit it online. So once you enroll in the class, you get access to Canvas, which is our e-learning environment, and you submit everything online. Inshallah. Okay, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And for those of you who are in Arabic, and have you gotten your Arabic grades yet? Okay, so it has been graded. If you want the Thursday class, which will be a private halaqa class, you have to let us know ASAP that you want to attend. If we get 7 people, then we will have the class. If we don't get 7 people, we won't have the class. I am sometimes going to be coming to it, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.